speaker is Shiv Arooor, Senior Executive Editor and Anchor at India Today TV. He has covered the Indian military for nearly 2 decades and has reported from conflict zones such as Kashmir, Northeast India, Sri Lanka, and Libya. He won 2 awards for reporting and founded the popular award-winning military news and analysis site LiveFest. He has authored Operation Jinnah and co-authored India's Most Fearless and India's Most Fearless 2. We will now have Shiv Arooor in conversation with ABHIJIT Iyer Mitra on the soon-to-be-launched India's Most Fearless 3. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we have the unenviable job of waking you all up because I know all these post-lunch sessions, you're all heavy after lunch. I don't have that responsibility. Shiv has that responsibility. So if he doesn't wake you up, feel free to throw stones or rotten tomatoes or rotten eggs or whatever you want at him. Now, just to give you a background, India's Most Fearless, this is volume 3 that we're talking about right now. But if you read volumes 1 and 2, they're extremely important books. And why that is because mostly you hear about conflicts, conflict histories written. There's very little focus on the individuals. Okay, the individual heroism, the individual command decisions and things like that taken. Now, in most other countries, you know, they tend to lionize and glorify their heroes. In India, we just tend to forget about them. You know, the media tends to pick up 1 or 2 photogenic figures who get covered in Kargil or something like that. And what about the hundreds of others who died, each one of which is a story of, you know, valiance and heroism and all of that. So that's why this is really important. And it's one thing making a TV documentary. Remember, TV documentaries are never footnoted in archives. This is what leads to your archival history, which then becomes easy to access. So that's why this is important. So please do go buy it. It's published by Penguin. It's being released
on August the 14th.
On August the 14th. I am lucky. I got my copy earlier. So do go and buy it. Now, the thing is, I'm not actually going to get into details of the book because we actually want you to buy it. So this is more like a amuse-bouche, you know, a sort of titillator for you to encourage you to go buy the book. So in your own words, Shiv, why don't you sort of sum up what all have you covered here? And if you could also give us a history about what your thinking was, how do you divide parts 1, 2, 3?
First of all, absolute honor to be here, and I'm thankful to the organizers for giving me Abhijit, who stands entirely by himself and his personality, but not very many people know is also someone who has written extensively on the military and is one of the most sought-after persons on military issues. So, fantastic. Also a huge fan of Abhijit, independent of all of this, apart from him being a dear friend. So this is an honor for me, and thank you to everyone here. Like Abhijit very rightly said, you know, in this country, either it's, as when it comes to soldiers, when it comes to individuals in the armed forces, either it's Bharat Mata ki Jai and this overarching sentimentalism about the military, or you just don't talk about them at all. There's nothing in between. So in these books, I think the compelling reason for writing these books initially, you know, was not something emotional at all. It was not like a, you know, a Tiranga or a Bharat Mata and we need to tell these stories to inspire generations. You know, I don't see myself as some kind of, you know, person who is going to inspire generations. I am a very ordinary journalist. My real reason for writing these stories is that these are fantastic stories, objectively speaking. You know, from any measure of imagination, these stories are superb stories. And we began in 2017 by writing India's Most Fearless 1, where the lead chapter was on the Uri surgical strikes. General Satish Dua, who was instrumental in that operation, is sitting right here, so big honor. He's also in the book also, in one of the most memorable scenes. So if you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It involves a bottle of whiskey, but I won't tell you anything more about that. The fact that we went to the armed forces and said, look, I know that we know that you don't like these stories coming out in public in too much detail, but these are amazing stories, you know, and if people are going to be inspired by them, as a side effect of reading them. What is your problem in that? Let's share these stories, because these are wonderful action stories involving Indians like you and me, not some superhumans, people like Abhijit and me who've got, who are deciding what to eat in the afternoon, what message to send our girlfriends or wives or whatever it is, what excuses to make about not going home on leave early enough, really, really bread and butter everyday things. And these are people like us. So it was very important for us to do that. We set the bar really high, I think, thanks to the armed forces with the Uri surgical strike. The second book led with a first-hand account of the Balakot airstrikes. And it's my greatest honor that the third book that's out in the next few days has a first-hand account of the, I'm sure you're going to ask me about that, Abhijit, but just to say that it's a first-hand account of the Galwan clash that happened in 2020. You and I both know that there were claims, counterclaims, kitne mare the, horrible questions like that became a very ugly kind of propaganda war between India and China. I'm very happy to tell you that this chapter is from the words of the people who actually fought the Chinese. Not my opinion, not the government's opinion. The Lance Nayaks, the Havildars, the soldiers who were actually there facing off with the Chinese, their words are in this chapter. And many of the questions that you have about what happened are all answered in this.
So Shiv, one of the things you mentioned was, the difficulty in negotiating with the military over how much you can reveal and how much you can't reveal. Because there is a certain line called operational detail which you don't want to get into. How did you end up negotiating that, especially for Galwan, given that it's so fresh and it's a current ongoing dispute where we've still not demobilized per se?
Absolutely great question, and this is something that has taken a kind of roller coaster journey, because as defense journalists, I've covered defense for I think 18 years now. Over time, one gets to know about the things that you can reveal and you can't reveal. You know that as a journalist. But in the writing of this book, I have to admit that we got carried away quite a bit, because to the credit of the armed forces, they gave us amazing access. They never said, you can meet this person, but you can't meet this person. You can see this book, but you can't see this book. We will censor something and give it to you. The armed forces never once did that. And they sent us everywhere. They said, see what you want, speak to whoever you want, record whatever you want, write what you want. The only condition is show it to us once before you publish it, and we might have a few suggestions. You will not believe, Abhijit, that for the Galwan chapter and for many other chapters, in fact, probably all chapters, but since we're talking about this one, I can tell you, they did not recommend a single change to the entire chapter. Not even a single change. Me and my co-author, Rahul, we were quite sure that there were certain things they would probably say, maybe we don't want to reveal this or reveal that. The army was absolutely clear. They say, you are the authors, you've written this, it's your work and your interpretation and the way you've done it, and you've spoken to the actual people who were in that operation. So why should we censor anything? So the army was very, very clean-hearted and clear about it, saying that they recognize the fact that this is a mission, an incident that has become twisted and kind of damaged because of all the claims and counterclaims. They said, let India and the world read what the people who survived that night have to say, and let's see if anybody can oppose that.
And getting to Galwan, what were some of the things when interviewing the soldiers you found that surprised you, in a sense? Something that you probably hadn't seen in the mainstream narrative, or that was quite different from the mainstream narrative?
The really unsettling thing about the Galwan incident, and most people don't know this, and we go into it with quite a bit of detail, is that the people who were fighting, the Indian soldiers and the Chinese soldiers who were fighting, they were familiar with each other. They knew each other. Most of them knew each other because they were interacting in meetings, border patrols, they used to cross each other. Some of them were friends, some on the Indian side spoke Chinese, some on the Chinese side spoke Hindi. They would exchange currency notes and things like that. You have to understand that it's not a hot border. The India-China frontier is not a hot border like the line of control, where friendships form. And the problem with what happened in Galwan, Abhijit, and to everyone here, is that something changed that night. Suddenly, the unexpected happened. The Indian side was clear that the Chinese were going to remove certain encroachments. They had a friendly meeting. After all, we're talking as friends here. Arey yaar, you guys have come 200 feet inside. Please remove this stuff and go back. You're not supposed to do this. But then, as an act of treachery, because China had already planned this, the same team came back with a much larger team after dark, and then everyone knows what happened. The news started filtering in about what happened, because it was a complete act of treachery. It was an offense. There was a lot of death. Abhijit's also spoken about it quite a bit. The weather, the freezing river, the fact that the Chinese completely violated the existing code of engagement as far as using weapons against each other. There are written rules before the Galwan incident about how no weapons are supposed to be used. No bodily harm of any kind should happen. Everything will happen in a peaceful manner. It completely killed that entire thing. So when we approached it, one of the surprising things is that, since you asked that, Abhijit, is the soldiers, and we made it a point to speak specifically to as many Jawans as possible, because the Jawans are the teeth of the military. Of course, I'm not saying officers are not, but the officers lead. But the Jawans are the ones who are actually part of the hand-to-hand combat, right? They're the ones who, of the 20 people who lost their lives, you know how many Jawans there were who lost their lives, and then there was the commanding officer, Colonel Santosh Babu. And this might be an emotional thing, but for me, in all the years that I've interacted with our Jawans, there's a purity about them. There's an amazing simplicity about our soldiers, and there's a purity about them. They're not swayed by, what people think about what they're saying. They're not worried about log kya sochenge about my opinion. So there was almost like this childlike purity about them, saying, "Arey, ye log to hamare dost the. These people were our friends. This guy I met, the Chinese interpreter who was also part of the operation, arey, this guy used to help us, translate messages so we could understand each other better." So there was a sense not only of treachery, but also of shock, saying, this is not that kind of border. This is not that kind of frontier. We knew each other. We met each other every 3-4 days for these small little border exchanges and meetings. So how can this kind of thing happen? Ye to upar se aaya hoga. Because finally the large numbers of people, as you know, Abhijit, who showed up for the Galwan clash were people who were not even part of that unit. They'd come from somewhere else. They'd been summoned overnight. They landed up there just to do the fighting. So the so-called friendly Chinese on the other side, they didn't even have a choice, because it was a larger military/political decision to create a situation like this and indulge in this kind of bloodshed.
Right. Do you think fundamentally, because you would have interviewed lots of soldiers, not just in Galwan, but other parts as well, do you think that, firstly, that loss of trust in that particular sector has now been sort of institutionalized across the border? Just because, the way the talks are going, they've been going on for over 2 years now without a satisfactory conclusion.
16 rounds, yeah.
Yeah. How much do you see it permeate those border troops? Are you seeing a sort of cold freeze come in those interactions now?
That's actually a really, really good question, Abhijit. The answer to that is yes and no, and I'll tell you why. What happened in Galwan has had very, very far-reaching effects on how India sees the Chinese on its border. For many decades, we've had largely peaceful. When I say peaceful, I mean that it's still a disputed border, but there's no crazy fighting going on and record numbers of killings taking place or anything like the line of control. There are established border protocols on how we deal with each other. But the Galwan incident, and Abhijit is absolutely right, is that it has permeated in many ways down to how we regard them, in the sense that the Indian army and, dare I say, the Chinese army have been forced into a sort of stage of constant readiness, because there is already an element of unpredictability when it comes to the Chinese. They don't respect border protocols clear by what happened in Galwan. They don't respect established diplomatic lines of communication. They say one thing in Beijing, they do another thing in Galwan or in Pangong So or other places. They constantly play mind games in order to try and confuse the adversary. So this is standard operating procedure for the Chinese. So the one effect that Galwan has had is that any sort of latent trust of a peaceful status quo on the border, that's dead, that's history, that's never going to happen. India is completely armed and ready for any eventuality, not just in Ladakh, but central sector in Uttarakhand, Arunachal Pradesh, anywhere else that we share a frontier with China. But on the converse side of it, Abhijit, you can look at this in any way that you want. Ultimately, it's easy for all of us to sit here and talk about how soldiers are dealing with each other across a small little fence or a small little wall. After all, they're humans. They're deployed there for months together. You will get to know the Chinese guy. You will get to know them. You will probably share stories. If you're doing a night, a night watch or a night guard, you're going to get to know them. How does it matter to you that your two governments are at war and stuff? Ultimately, you're humans sitting over a campfire on a frontier area, and you're going to be dealing with other people as humans. Ultimately, when you reduce all these things down, they're no longer just robotic soldiers sitting somewhere. We tend to regard militaries as kind of bloodless, cold, action figures sitting somewhere at the border. Ultimately, they're people like us. They are from us. They're from this society. Many of them might be related to you, and they're there dealing with other humans. So in that sense, Abhijit, it hasn't permeated in that sense. Like, for example, there was a recent visit to Demchok where someone told me about the fact that this is one of the places where they're the most ready for some kind of violation. But there's still that friendliness at the very, very company, tactical, small soldier level. It continues to exist. Because these are relationships.
Of course. In the past, we had those videos in 2017 come out of the danda beatings and the stone throwings and all of that. It was always a case of, "Arey, ye to hote rehta hai," and then they'll go play football and things like that. But why do you think this was quite a paradigm shift in the way? Because China always seemed to want to maintain a sort of cold border. They never wanted it to go hot. So to macro this a bit, what do you think changed in China, or do you buy the miscommunication theory that this was a local commander gone rogue?
I don't think it was a local commander gone rogue because as you can see, the situation in Ladakh has become a very a frozen kind of status quo. The large deployment of Chinese that was there in 2020 after the first face-off has only increased over time. They've built bridges. They've activated additional air bases. So this was not some local commander who decided we need to teach India a lesson. This was definitely, in my view at least, Abhijit, a larger political decision to make use of the pandemic, to make use of the world distracted by COVID-19, which of course is China's greatest export, and other things, to kind of action their many expansionist impulses. They're doing it right now in the East. They've done it in Ladakh. I also believe that it was part of a strategy post possibly the abrogation of Article 370 and the creation of Ladakh as a union territory. Could have been one of the, I don't believe it was the trigger, but I believe it was one of the things that was taken into account by China as, hey, how are they taking all these decisions in a place that's so close to, a place where we're already having a lot of trouble, which is Tibet. And therefore, I think they incrementally started doing this. 2017 on the banks of Pangong, I don't know if anyone here has seen that video, viral video from 2017 where Indian and Chinese soldiers beat the hell out of each other on the banks of the Pangong Lake. And then 3 years later, you've seen what happened at virtually the same place. That's where the standoff actually began. Many people think it began in Galwan. It didn't. It actually began on the banks of the same lake in Ladakh, and nothing has changed. It's gotten worse.
And just to be clear, that Y curve where this entire thing happened, the Y bend of that river, it's literally just about 100, 200 feet inside India as we understand it. It's not the 20 kilometers, 5 kilometers, 1.5 kilometers that people were saying, right? Let's take this to another tragedy. I'm sorry, I'm just focusing on the tragedies, but just to keep it relevant to today's audience. The second thing you discuss very majorly in this book is the crash of the helicopter that claimed General Bipin Rawat's life. Do you just want to talk us through that generally without going into too many details?
Yeah. So General Bipin Rawat, who needs no introduction here, was one of the strongest advocates of this book. It was to him that me and my co-author Rahul had gone to back in 2017, saying, let's do this. Let's tell stories that you guys would otherwise never tell. And he was one of our strongest endorsers and advocates of this kind of thing. And we had met General Rawat 3 days before that crash. We'd gone to him with an initial plan. We hadn't even started writing anything, and he'd called us to his house, and we'd gone to meet him. And he was like, "Tum log kya kar rahe ho? Why are you delaying this so much? I get calls all the time saying, when is the next book out?" And we were just being lazy and whatever and stuff. And obviously another terrible lesson in not taking anything for granted. And 3 days later, everyone knows what happened. In this, and this is something we're revealing for the first time here, that the second chapter in our book is about, everyone here remembers that when that helicopter crashed, one man survived. His name was Group Captain Varun Singh. He was an Air Force pilot. He wasn't the pilot in the helicopter, but he was there. So everyone remembers that for 1 week he had survived. He was alive. He was taken to Bengaluru. Tragically, he passed away. Not many people know that Group Captain Varun Singh is also a recipient of a Shaurya Chakra for a previous incident. So we went to the Air Force and we said, I know it's too soon. The tragedy has just happened, but I think it's important that, a country that came together to pray for a guy they didn't even know in this amazing way. And I think everyone here remembers, right? The sole survivor of that crash, he was being looked after in the ICU in Bengaluru. And we thought it's very important to kind of close the loop, as it were, on Group Captain Varun Singh, young fighter pilot, just in his late 30s. And so the Air Force, after a degree of consideration, said, we can do this. So one of the chapters, happy to tell you, is on Group Captain Varun Singh. It details a bit about the crash itself, but doesn't go into the aspects of why the crash happened. But it goes into his absolutely amazing backstory. This was a guy who was, everyone has that one picture of Varun Singh, which you all remember, him in his uniform. But wait till you read the kind of stuff that this guy did while he was a fighter pilot. He was crazy. So that story is also a great honor to be in this book.
So was he in good cheer when you interviewed him?
We never got to interview him at all because we wrote the chapter after the crash.
Right.
So we never got to, that's again the sad part. In fact, me and my co-author actually had this, what if we had interviewed him before? Would we have gotten, more of a perspective? Sadly, and one can be cynical about this, but, and this is one of the reasons why we wrote this book, because you see faces and you hear some stories during Republic Day or Independence Day, and then they're forgotten. I'm sure that most people here haven't even thought of Varun Singh since that crash happened. Like for the last 6 months, nobody would have thought of him because you felt very emotionally about it at that time. You felt very strongly about it that time. You maybe even prayed for his life, because you're all good people. But we're humans after all. The parade moves on. Then you're moving on with your life. And who has time to think about Group Captain Varun Singh? So that's one of the reasons we wrote these books, because I think the written word has a life. It makes these people in some ways immortal. There's no date on these soldiers and these officers because the written word kind of transcends everything. And I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
I wish I'd met him. I really wish. The stuff we heard about him was, this guy was like your typical, let's go and get this done kind of fighter pilot. The real Top Gun type of image that you have of fighter pilots, this guy embodied that.
Was this entire thing about, just macroing it a bit, the first thing that we heard once the news of that crash broke were a whole lot of conspiracy theories. And some of us find those conspiracy theories quite irritating, if not downright insulting. But there is a whole psychology to conspiracy theories. because you observed it much more carefully, what did you make of all those conspiracy theories and the entire psychology behind it and things like that?
I'm not surprised at all. I think conspiracy theories, by their very nature, are quite amusing because it shows a level of creativity. To name just three, since Abhijit is not naming them, I'll name the three conspiracy theories that came out the day of the crash. One, obviously, our good friendly neighboring terrorists. Okay, they had come and they whacked this guy as revenge for Uri and etc. etc. Number two, LTT terrorists, Tamil terrorists, who had come and killed this guy. The third conspiracy theory, and this is actually one of my favorites, is that the Air Force got it done themselves. The Air Force got it done because of the whole, he's the chief of defense staff, there are territorial wars between the Army, Navy and Air Force, and that the Air Force is involved, the Air Force is involved in bumping off General Bipin Rawat because they're not happy with the decisions he's taken. Preposterous, BS like this was part of conspiracy theories that went crazy viral. People were like reasonable people were talking about them and saying, did you hear? People are saying this, rubbish, complete rubbish. But I'm not surprised by them, Abhijit, because the fact is, especially in an incident like that helicopter crash, which all of you remember, it broke, then we didn't know what was happening. Is General Rawat in the helicopter? Is he not in the helicopter? Is his wife also with him? We don't know. Who else was there? Who was flying? Where were they going? Did he survive? Did he not survive? General Rawat is no more, but his wife has survived. No, his wife is also no more. Then there was information that General Rawat is the sole survivor of the crash. There was all this misinformation and confusion over this. And I think that was just ripe for all these silly conspiracy theories.
Right, but at least in private, the army was quite forthright. I think we got to know at least a good 14, 15 hours before it was announced that
they were very forthright.
Yeah, they were. And there was also the video which came out, which, those chaps walking on the railway tracks, which kind of made it very clear that it wasn't a shoulder-fired missile or anything like that the LTT or somebody had deployed, just to move further to yet another tragedy. Unfortunately, this is military stories and heroes.
There's a lot of tragedy in this book, he's right.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of, the nature of this book is, sorry Abhijit for interrupting you, but the nature of this book is many of the heroes we've written about are, were killed in action during the missions that we write about. But there are many who we're very happy to say are still alive. And I always tell my co-author, I hope that one day we can write an India's Most Fearless where everyone we're writing about is alive.
Next one up is the April 2020, the Kiran sector, where 5 of our commandos died. Now, it's not the first infiltration that's happened. It's certainly not the most deadly infiltration that happened. What was particularly special about that focused you onto that specific story?
Well, just to introduce you all to that mission, this was, and I won't be surprised if most of you haven't even heard of it, but you should know about it. This was a mission, an encounter that happened in April 2020, just days after India went into lockdown, like the national lockdown everyone remembers. It was just literally a few days after India went into a lockdown, there was an intelligence alert about this big terror infiltration by Pakistani terrorists in the Kiran sector. It's a high altitude LOC sector in Kashmir. And it was a devastating operation because the Indian Special Forces, the 4 para, doesn't need any introduction, but the 4 para Special Forces of the Army is the same unit that conducted the surgical strikes. Famous, fearless warriors, one of the most decorated Special Forces units as well. And they went into this operation, young commandos, in the prime of their careers, and it was a devastating loss because they lost 5 men, 5 commandos were killed in action, hunting those terrorists in the most, I can't describe it. You'll know when you read it, but you'll also see some pictures which are there in the book. The most hostile terrain that you can imagine, like multiply that by 100. Like steep snowy cliffs, blizzard conditions, absolutely nowhere to keep your feet. You're a mountaineer, dodging bullets, chasing terrorists down these deep snow rift valleys. It's the scariest, one of the scariest stories that I've ever written. And I think what drew me to it, Abhijit, to answer your question, is just the fact that it happened at a time when the country was in lockdown. That was especially a shock. And two, that the fact that I think the special forces at large were coming to terms with the loss. You know, in Uri, the Uri operation was, there were no losses. One of the soldiers was injured during the return from Uri, but incredibly, there was no loss of life. It was a perfect operation. In this particular operation, there was a terrible stroke of bad luck. I don't want to spoil it for you because you'll read about it in the book. There was a terrible stroke of bad luck in what would have been a similarly, clear-cut operation where these guys would have gone and got these terrorists. There was just a terrible, unforeseen, not in their control stroke of bad luck to do with the weather that doomed that operation. And I think that's what really spoke to me, Abhijit. The fact that there's nothing these guys could have done. There's nothing these guys could have done to make that any better. The universe was not on their side that day.
When was the last time we... Yeah. When
You can
was...
open them to, if
the
you want.
questions, sure. When was the last time we lost that many commandos? Because a commando is an extremely high-value soldier, right? Losing one commando is almost like losing a Mirage 2000 in Air Force terms in that sense. When was the last time we lost a commando in combat situations before that?
We've lost commandos during the Pampore encounter on the outskirts of Srinagar a few years ago. We've also written about that in the previous India's Most Fearless. But on this scale of a frontline, special forces unit, I don't think it's ever happened. All in one single encounter, Abhijit.
Yeah. Okay, folks, questions right at the back, right there. Keep the questions short, please, so that we can give Shiv more time to answer them.
So during these clashes, for each and hour or each and every minute, we came to know soldiers died on the border. So wasn't that the breach of national security? You news channels covered that. Apart from that side, we didn't, still we are claiming the actual figures of these Chinese soldiers, which has not been disclosed by the Chinese army or the Chinese media or so. So aren't we breaching the national security and showing, look, our Indian soldiers, this many Indian soldiers have been died from India. Wasn't that the breach of national security? I'm yet to complete. And apart from that, your colleague was also very interested to show what was the number, what was the actual number from the Indian side to the world as well as to the Indians also. Wasn't that the breach of national security?
Okay, so two answers. One, it's not like we journalists, I accept most of the hate that journalists get.
No, I'm asking about your colleague.
Wait.
I'm saying most of the time we deserve it, but in this particular case, I have to defend my fraternity because we were reporting the losses that the army was reporting. The army issued an official statement saying, this is what has happened in Galwan and these many people have lost their lives and these are their names. These were all official figures. These were all official things. There was nothing unofficial about it. On your second question, there has been a lot of tutu meme over the figures of the Chinese side. Okay, the Chinese say 4 of our people were killed in this clash, which I find it very distasteful as a journalist, as a human, as a person who covers defense, to talk in this way about dead soldiers. It's horrible, whether it's China, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's any country. I find it frankly distasteful to talk about itne mare hain, this many have died, they are lying, it's not like this. This is just personal. I'm not preaching to anyone, it's personal. But the reason why it's become important to clarify on that point is because China claiming 4 people have died was a political message. It was not a message of fact. They were doing it in order to make India seem like it was a weaker country, to humiliate us on the world stage, to paint this picture like it was a one-sided battle, that the Indian army is incompetent, that the Indian military didn't know what hit it. So that's the reason why it becomes a political issue and not just an issue of facts. And therefore, I'd like to tell you that the key question of how many Chinese died, not in my view, not in the view of the Chinese, not in the view of the government, not in the view of the BJP, but in the view of the army unit that did the fighting and recorded those losses, is in this book.
Anyone else? Two more. Kritatma there and Rajat here.
Hi, firstly, thank you so much, Shivji, for what you're doing and for bringing it. My question is that when you said that the chopper crashed and a lot of misinformation was flowing through, do we have an intelligence apparatus that is on SIGINT, TechInt, and all of that was on an overdrive, trying to know where the disinformation is flowing from? You know, the IP addresses, like the connections, was that rolling while this information was spreading and coming out to kind of curtail and contain it? Or if you can elaborate.
I'll give you a very honest answer, because that's what you expect from me. We have TechInt, SIGINT, communications intelligence infrastructure in the country, but it is not as hit the ground running and fast enough to actually detect these things in an actionable time frame when these things are actually developing. This is not a criticism. This is work in progress, because tracking such things during a developing situation are always going to be very difficult. Most countries are far ahead of us, including China, in this kind of thing. Certainly Pakistan. We're catching up. I think it's the answer to your question is that it's still work in progress. We've been late on that bus.
Thank you, Zain.
And the last question right here, the gentleman in the zebra stripes.
Hello, Shiv. Good afternoon. So I have no question related to India's most fearless. I will read that book, 100% sure. So I have a question for you. So whenever you talk of bravery of our forces, maybe the Air Force or Army, or क्यों न करे भाई हमारी forces है, तो I see like a few of the comments, like hatred comment on that also. Related to you, Shiv, when you saw like on the comment, maybe it's a sponsored by coup, so I will take a coup, I will not take other. So how you deal with that?
What kind of hatred are you talking about?
Even on the, let's say like they used to call the Modi Bhakt, when you say something, they
on
used
Twitter
to
or things
portray,
like that. Yeah.
I always see that, when I see the comments. So, like a special media, I will say coup, but where I am talking, I see the comments.
Yeah, I hear your question.
Yeah. Thank you.
If anyone follows me on social media, and Abhijit's very much like that also, it's like, you don't give importance to hatred. I mean, you run with the punches. I mean, we're all humans at the end of the day. If someone abuses you on social media, so what? They may be having a bad day. They may be frustrated about something else. Their life might not be going in the way that they wanted to.
Even some politician
no,
also,
like
a number of like they have.
No two fro, please. Thank you very much. That was the last question. I hope you enjoyed this session. Please go buy this book. It is going to be released on the 14th of August. And you'll be able to buy it at all major bookstores. And you can also clap for me for not bullying my junior from school days.
Oh yeah.
So it took a
fun
superhuman
fact, he's my
effort
senior
not to.
from school.
So thank you guys. Hope you enjoyed that.
I'm here for the rest of the day. I know the time was short, but if anybody has any more questions, I'll be happy to take them from you. Thank you.